Thank you very much for joining us and welcome to this program. Good evening, American Joker.
I'm Linda Boguti.
Now, it was a day of jubilation for the three candidates who scored 430 marks out of a possible 500 marks to secure the top positions in the 2012 Kenya Certificate of Primary Education examinations.
Joy Kadhure from Meru, Boniface Mwaura and Wachira Njomo were tied in first place, but as KTN's Wilkisa Nyabo reports, though they're celebrating now that the results have been announced, it wasn't all smooth sailing.
The announcement of the results of the Kenya Certificate of Primary Education examinations of 2012 led to an avalanche of emotions. Candidates who topped the exam rushed to primary schools to celebrate the fruits of their hard work with their teachers, reminiscing about the long walk to the top. In November last year, when Utafiti Primary School held a prayer session for its KCPE candidates, Boniface Mwaura's face was just one in a sea of hopeful faces. 2012 had been a difficult year for him, one that saw Boniface sit the exam while hobbling around on crutches after he broke his leg. But come January, the turmoil of 2012 would be wiped away by the announcement that Mwaura was one of three leading students in an exam that had been taken by 811,930 candidates across the country. He scored 430 marks, a feat that saw him lifted high above his peers.
He was named second, and I could not even wait for the marks to be announced. I just had Mwaura, Kiongo, Boniface. Then I screamed. I was so excited.
It also required a strong-hearted person, never giving up in everything that you do. School life is not very easy. You have to brave it so as to get such good marks.
Of the top 11 positions, only 4 were taken by girls, and the top girl would come not from Nairobi as widely expected, but from Meru. A bashful Joy Kadhure Kinoti was the center of attention in Meru. She was one of 3 students who were tied for first place with 430 marks out of a possible 500, a position she also shared with Wachira Njomo. Her position as the #1 girl came as a surprise.
The exam was okay, and honestly I worked hard, but I didn't exactly expect to be the #1 student.
And now that they have made it over the hurdle successfully, the top candidates have set their eyes on the highest prizes.
I'd like to join Alliance High School. I liked it because of its outstanding performance in the national examinations over the years.
I'd like to join Alliance, and I'd like to be an engineer.
Having tasted success once, the top candidates eager to embark on their next adventure, but not just yet. After 8 years of hard work, today was set aside simply for celebration. Wilkisa Nyabo, KTN Prime.
Let's take a closer look at those numbers as the results were released this day. And of course, let's start with a look at the top 10 male nationally. There was a tie on the first male student in 2012's KCPE exams. That was between Mwaura, Boniface, Kiongo and Wachira Njomo, who both got 430 points out of a possible 500. Muteti Kelvin Mwangangi and Kindiki Dan Muthomi both tied as well. They were placed at number 3 with 429 points. Things were not different on number 3, which was also a tie between Hanji Banderi Nikun and Maina Douglas, who both got 427 points. Let's shift our attention to the top 10 female nationally, and the first female candidate had the same number as the first male in 2012 exams at 430 points out of a possible 500. Kinoti Joy Kadhure had 430. That is a girl that comes from Meru. Shalom Nthenya Mulinge, 428. Gitamo Audrey Kemunto, Muriga Veronica, all of them are from Nairobi, and the only tie in this list came at number 5 with Gitonga Vivian Kawira and Owori Cheryl Jeruto at 425 as well. Let's now look at the counties. Which county emerged the best out of all the counties? Kirinyaga topped that list with a mean score of 273. Elgeyo Marakwet 272, Nandi, Uasin Gishu and Baringo in that order, with Baringo and Uasin Gishu tying at 270. Now what you need to realize is that 3 of these counties were among 19 counties that did not have any cases of examination irregularities. We're talking about Nandi, Uasin Gishu and Baringo. Bottom 5 counties, we're looking at Kwale, Tana River, Wajir, Garissa and Mandera. Once again, the bottom 5 counties, Kwale, Tana, Wajir, Garissa and Mandera. Now this is where there's a little bit of concern. If you recall, Tana River has been in the news for all the wrong reasons, from cattle rustling to senseless killings that Kenyans have witnessed in the last couple of months. And we've had stories of closure of schools and families moving away from their homes. It is widely believed that this could have contributed in one way or the other to the kind of results that were witnessed today in the morning. Mandera and Garissa, Wajir have in one way or another been affected by the spate of insecurity, and analysts say this could have contributed to the dismal performance that was announced this morning. Let's look at top 5 schools nationally now, and that list is topped by New Light Komarok in Nairobi, Makini Ngong Road Academy still in Nairobi. Number 3 had Gilgil Hills Academy, Mariel Academy, Fred's Academy and Chelsea Academy at number 3, 4 and 5 respectively. Now what you need to remember, even as these results were being released, is that the selection of candidates to join government secondary schools has been reviewed and will now be done strictly on merit. Choice of schools by the candidates and proportionate sharing of available spaces between public and private candidates in a district and on the basis of a district's candidature. Njoka.
Well, following the release of the results, Form 1 selection is now all set to begin next Monday. Education Minister Mutula Kilonzo says the exercise will be strictly based on merit, choice of schools and proportionate sharing, unlike last year when pupils from public schools got an advantage. The 2012 KCPE results were released as the spotlight once again turned on the relevance of KCPE. KTN's Rita Tinina reports.
The class of 2012 was the first since the inception of KCPE 28 years ago to sit the exams in December. The delay occasioned by a 3-week teachers' strike, but the government is making an assurance on the results.
Neither the strike by teachers nor the scheduling affected candidates' performance negatively.
The 2012 candidates did not beat the 442 score set by the class of 2011, but the overall performance improved, with more than half of the candidates who sat the exams obtaining above 250 marks. And the country is well on its way to achieving gender parity.
51.2% boys, 48.9% girls in 2012.
Exam irregularities too are on the decline compared to 2011. Only 718 cases or 0.09% of exam malpractices were reported in 28 of the country's 47 counties.
This was a very, very significant drop when compared to 7,967 candidates involved in 2011.
And once again, the 844 and the KCPE dilemma was on the agenda. Education Minister Mutula Kilonzo says the government will relook at the assessment regime to ensure it lays emphasis on technology, innovation, entrepreneurship and talent development.
The current summative assessment at the end of the primary and secondary cycle, like KCPE and KCSE examinations, may not adequately be measuring learners' abilities.
Following the release of the results, Form 1 selection will begin on the 4th of February. Unlike in the 2011 results, this time round, the selection will not favor candidates from public schools.
And will now be done strictly on merit, choice of schools by the candidates, and a proportionate sharing of available places between public and private schools.
And with the general election in the middle of the school term, the minister says the education calendar has been designed to cater for the elections.
Learners will therefore break for a half-term beginning Thursday 28th February and ending Thursday 7th March.
With the wait for the results now over, attention will shift to the Form 1 selection process as candidates prepare for the big move to secondary school. And once again, the government will be grappling with the issue of transition rates to secondary school, with hundreds set to miss out on Form 1 places. Rita Tinina, KTN, Nairobi.
Right, so the results are out, and that story by Rita Tinina leads us to our big question tonight. And we ask you, do you think public schools still need affirmative action in Form 1 selection?
The question is at the bottom of your screen. Send your SMS yes or no response with brief comments to the number 8040, and we'll surely sample your views during this newscast and give you the poll results at the right end of this bulletin.
Would really love to hear what you think about that. Let's stay with the results. And the Coast region once again had a poor showing in this year's KCPE results. No student from the region's 6 counties made it to the top 20, while Mombasa County, which ranked the best of the 6, was 35th nationally.
That's right, and so as Ferdinand Omondi reports, the Coast region has very little to smile about.
Victory Junior Academy in Mombasa's Changamwe area in wild celebrations following news that it was the leading performer in Mombasa County. And they felt they deserved it.
Tulikuwa tumefanya matayarisho kambambe, tulikuwa tumejiandaa ipasavyo.
But the joy ends here. Mombasa performed poorly in national rankings, and the rest of the Coast region languished at the tail end of performances. Mombasa County was ranked 35th out of 47 counties, while the others in the Coast region, that is Kilifi, Taita Taveta, Lamu, Kwale, and Tana River, ranked 40 to 44 in that order. Only the very arid counties of Wajir, Garissa, and Mandera ranked worse. That's not all. No schools from the Coast region ranked among the top 20 nationally. Masaha James of Kilifi County was the region's top student. At 423 marks, he ranked 22nd nationally. His closest competitor from the 6 counties in the region was Moses Saruni Sampao, who came a distant 45th nationally. However, there was hope in the most improved schools category. Mavirivirini School in Kwale County, which had a mean score of 149 in 2011, improved to a mean score of 258. It was ranked 6,524th countrywide. Ngomeni Primary School in Kilifi County improved from a score of 153 last year to 242 this year. But it ranked number 9,285 countrywide. For Victory Junior Academy, with a mean score of 365,
target mpya mwaka huu tunaomba Mungu tuweze kupata zaidi ya 370.
Their target this year is simply to go one better than their own score in a region where competition is far from cutthroat. Different year, same story. The Coast region has yet again performed dismally in the national examinations. Yet it is schools like the Victory Academy that offers a silver lining that there is still hope in the dark cloud that is the poor educational standards in this region. Ferdinand Omondi, KTN, Changamwe, Mombasa County.
Ferdinand Omondi with a look at how the coastal region performed in the just released results. Let's now focus our attention on politics. And the Coalition for Reforms and Democracy, otherwise known as CORD, has launched its manifesto that promises to radically overhaul the public service within the first 100 days in office. The largely pro-poor manifesto dwells on investment-heavy policies, including free secondary education, universal healthcare, tax incentives to industries and grants for micro-enterprises. But as KTN's political affairs editor Noah Otieno reports, the coalition is silent on how it will raise the finances for its plans. Take a look.
The CORD Alliance's 10-point agenda, launched amidst March fanfare at Nairobi's Kenyatta International Conference Center, is big on policies expected to strike a chord with the majority poor and to resonate with the masses.
Our vision, our dream is founded on the fundamentals of the rule of law and our new constitution.
The CORD team is promising to prioritize the creation of jobs pledging to lay the foundation to move Kenya to a self-sustaining economy within 20 years. It is, however, their pledge to take one major industry to each of the 47 counties that could invite much scrutiny and debate given the unequal spread of infrastructure and the funding the next government will inherit from the Kibaki regime.
The question foremost in many of our young people's minds is, how can I get a job? The manifesto that we are launching today is called Plan to Build a New Economy that works for everyone.
They also pledge to heavily subsidize agriculture to ensure food security with focus on innovative technologies. On national security, they are staking their success on a return to the rule of law and reform of the security structures. The other agenda, which has already become a central campaign platform for the CORD team, is to entrench public participation in government.
Age is but a number. Leadership is not found in age. Leadership is in ideas.
Their plan for combating poverty, however, seems dependent on the success of other parts of their manifesto, riding on general terms such as increased investment, keeping inflation low, and social welfare. They also intend to sell themselves on the platform of expansive infrastructural development and addressing land injustices. With land expected to be one of the biggest issues in this election, critics are, however, likely to demand a clearer plan from the CORD team on how they intend to address the land problem.
Your CORD government will implement the constitutional provisions to address these historical injustices and inequalities on land, while in the same vein upholding the sanctity of title.
Like the NARC team did with free primary education in 2002, the CORD Alliance is running on a promise to introduce free secondary education. The universal healthcare promised by the CORD team is also likely to open up debate about whether this means more taxes to cater for all these promises. Their flag bearer is set to officially launch his presidential bid on Wednesday. The challenge for the main coalitions and the individuals seeking the presidency in this year's election is that most of the things they could have promised in their manifestos of 1997, 2002, and even 2007 have already been infused in the Constitution of Kenya 2010. And therefore the real competition among the main coalitions and the individuals will be on which one of them will be the most convincing in terms of how they intend to implement that constitution. Now, KTN at the Kenyatta International Conference Center in Nairobi.
All right, thank you, Noah, for that. And attention is on Prime Minister now after the CORD launched its manifesto, and we'll have an interview. We had an interview with Right Honourable Prime Minister Raila Odinga. My colleague James Smart had that interview. We'll have that interview in a short while, but now I'll take you back to Louis Otieno on the other side of the studio for an update on what he has today.
Oh, thank you, Njoka. Yes, I'm in studio with Kwame Owino, and this is a very important day in a milestone of political history, and I don't want to set your mind in any particular direction, so let me just open up by asking you, what did it mean to you to see CORD release their manifesto, to launch it today?
Okay, I think it's a good thing that you're asking from somebody in the media, because the conventional story that goes around and which gets repeated by some of your colleagues in both the print and electronic media is that these parties don't have differences. Mm-hmm. That one manifesto for one party or one coalition is as good as the other. The truth is they're not. And I think this is illustrated. One, by the posture that this specific party has taken. Of course, it's a compressed manifesto with 10 different things. Some of them are good. There's a good, there's a bad. And some of it, not too many, but some that are obviously a little unrealistic and require us to interrogate and ask them more questions much later, so they can actually cost those proposals and actually let us know how they intend to work, because they seem to be extremely counter to some of the promises that have been made before.
How did we get to that space where, is it just because of stories that come out? Is it because of flawed discussions? But why is it strongly, there's still the belief that there's no separation? Whose effort is it supposed to be? For them to show us the delineation, or for us to make an effort to just find out why they're different?
I think it's just because of the political season. In the political season, our politicians have learned that the way to respond to the public is through rostrum politics, and they're very good at it. I mean, whether it's by telling stories or by attacking each other, they're extremely good at it. So we on this side of the world wait for them to look for policy. I mean, we ask them to discuss policies and forget that those manifestos is what happens. I don't think you'd be reading a 10-point plan to a group of people sitting in a field for 3 hours. So obviously, I think it's the fault on our side for failing to actually search and ask them to answer questions based on that.
There's also a level of impatience, and I see that because, like you correctly said, you can't go to every rally, baraza, every outing, and you take people through the paces from stage 1 to 2. But then the same people then claim, we've not been taught, we've not been exposed to it. How do you bridge this? That impatience for us, we don't want to read it, we don't want to engage because it's long and boring. But we just want headlines. How then do we interrogate a manifesto?
Well, I think you started by us being here today to talk about these 10 points and some of the things that they do. So that's that. And I think as the viewers are out there, they'll take some time. This manifesto is available on their website and it's widely distributed. I think a good proportion of it will also be spoken about tomorrow. So that's one way of starting.
There's a discussion that says they are anchored on Vision 2030. In a short while, by the way, Professor Anyang' Nyong'o is going to join us, and we can then ask him politically what motivated whatever stance they took. But is that your view also? Is it anchored in Vision 2030?
I actually think that there's a contradiction in saying that we will be following Vision 2030 and at the same time issuing a manifesto. It looks good to say that as a politician I have a long-term vision, but let's remember that a politician, or rather the president and his deputy, are elected for a 5-year term. Now, the manifesto that we have had, or rather the Vision 2030, represents President Kibaki's own view. And so, some of the things that have been committed to, yes, broadly they've committed to the Vision 2030, but at the same time they have their own preferences, which would contradict the Vision 2030, especially as you hear President Kibaki's assessment, again, has been that we need to provide, or rather, we need to support the very successful, in my view, universal primary education with the support for secondary education. This party, or rather, the party that released today has been talking about, yes, they mentioned free secondary school education, which is very different from what President Kibaki has provided. And so to that extent, it's inconsistent with what the Vision 2030 speaks about so far, because the intention is actually to support a subsidy for secondary education equivalent to a day school, because otherwise it becomes too expensive and it will overwhelm the resources that are available. So unless this new party and CORD, or rather the coalition, tells us how they intend to appropriate more resources, then their manifesto so far is incomplete.
And that seems to be the running question, where will you get the money? But also, when a party releases a manifesto, and there's a lot of discussion around it towards election, election will come and go. Who will discuss the manifesto, and how do we then raise checks and balances? Because after that, the conversation moves. And I almost think the politicians are very comfortable with that, because they're only on the spotlight now for a few more weeks, and then nobody talks about the manifesto again.
I think that's why the launch of a manifesto in a date like this and the kind of emphasis that the media has given, including this media house, is important. Because for someone like myself, I work in a think tank, and our work is basically to look at what they do, and holding them accountable means thumbing through that manifesto to understand what promises they make. So some 2-3 months after the election has passed, and it's unfortunate that everybody seems to think that our world ends on the 4th of March, when 5th of March and whatever comes, one party or the other will be in power, and Touchwood, of course, will be in peace as we anticipate, so somebody will govern. So they'll have to govern against a certain manifesto. On the other hand, the opposition, or whoever will be in the opposition, will actually have to hold them to account based on the manifesto and the alternative. So yes, we think a manifesto is extremely important, and that's why to trivialize it by saying that they're all the same is to be clever by half, because they never are the same.
And how do we challenge somebody's promise? Because he's making a promise, the party is making a promise. They're asking you, take faith, have faith, give it a chance to roll out. So is it then fair at the day of making a promise, we then tell them, I don't see how your promise will come to fruition? How are we supposed to challenge this?
Well, you challenge it based on reality. For instance, I don't know why none of these people seem to be saying, my biggest problem is employment is a big problem. Constitutional implementation, in my view, is a challenge because of the political shenanigans that tend to take place. But my big problem in this country is our public debt and the management of public sector wages. For instance, this year, nobody seems to mention it, all the amount of money that our good KRA raised for us was not enough to even pay salaries alone. So we are actually borrowing money from money markets to actually pay salaries and pay for our development expenditure. So when you are saying that we are going to hire more teachers, which I don't think we need, we are going to hire nurses and doctors, which I think we need, as this coalition has said, then they need to let us. What are you going to let go? Because something will have to give. So how do you balance those two?
Because you can't keep adding to what can't sustain itself.
Precisely. You can't keep adding to the wages side without thinking about how you raise more money.
How do they get away with this? Because where can we raise a consistent argument on this and make a consistent comparison? What I always like to do is try and take it back to the citizen and say, you've got to be responsible. And sometimes the citizen will say, how do I get engaged? I know sometimes it's just laziness, and sometimes it's lack of initiative. But for a conscious citizen who says, I want to know that the right thing is being done, how would we direct them to get involved in these promises?
Well, I think it's this. For instance, when at the same time a party says that we are going to increase payments made to people who are above 65, which is okay, at the same time we are going to provide every poor family with some kind of subsidy and assistance. The first thing you should ask, are you going to raise my taxes? Because that's what it means. So it's the detail. I think governance is about detail, and to be properly governed, because this party has also said, the coalition says that it will allow for public participation in governance. Let's test that by asking them, fine, let's participate as you're building your coalition, or rather, in interrogating your manifesto, and you must provide us with meaningful spaces. And how do you provide us with meaningful spaces? One of the things that I don't see these parties being committed to is transparency. The only way for us to challenge that is to ensure that all budget figures will be correct, there will be no mistakes of computer or human nature, and that they will be released in time for us to be allowed to make the question, to ask the questions that are necessary.
If we go sector by sector, do you think there's participation, especially when we make promises on industry, when we make promises on manufacturing? Was there active, because you've done the research, was there active participation for those people who are actually involved? I know we broadly just call them stakeholders, but it's more involving than that. Do they talk to these people? Do they input what these guys are asking for?
Well, you can see certain proposals that have been in the public domain that represent the interest that most of the private sector or some members of the private sector would like. And that's not bad. But you can also see others that are specifically related to some people wanting to make economic policy for the purposes of benefiting a few. So that too shows you that yes, it's not it's not complete, but there's some space must have been open. I don't know who they spoke to, and of course it's their preserve to actually choose who to speak to and all that. But then it's now our opportunity as citizens who may, depending on how the elections go, may be governed under this manifesto, to tell them that I actually do not think you should continue to promise to reduce my cost of living by controlling foreign exchange rates, which is one other thing that they've done. Because foreign exchange controls is what gave us Golden Bag.
Right.
So are they aware that that is what caused Golden Bag? Because once you do that, you allow certain people to then manipulate systems. The main things is sugar, maize, rice, and generally food items are the major causes of inflation in addition to fuel. So will you open these markets and ensure that either your relatives, your friends, or the people who've sponsored your party are not the ones importing sugar 2 years from today? Those are meaningful discussions to have. And I think a manifesto like this allows us to actually go through line by line and ask those questions.
Right, and just before we go back to the day's highlights, the evergreen excuse we have is, I was in this with another team, I was in this with another player, so I couldn't really see my own plan to fruition. Coalition politics are still here with us. How do we protect ourselves as citizens from this excuse?
Well, I think that's quite an... It's difficult because managing coalitions is itself a skill, which is a political skill very separate from the rest. But now that this is it's not a single party's or a single individual's manifesto, this is a manifesto upon which I think the whole coalition, I think about 11 parties have agreed to. So then there will not be an excuse thereafter, for instance, if this coalition should govern. Right. I think the other that will also release its manifesto, the main contenders, as to be honest, there are not too many of them that have a chance, but the main contenders will also release one. And the good thing is as well, it will be a manifesto to which all the party leaders or people who will play a big role in governance have committed to. So then we will not have an excuse, because for this term, from 2008, after the difficult moments, we did not have a harmonized manifesto of sorts. Of course, there were government plans and medium-term plans, but this time we have a manifesto and nobody will be giving us the excuse of I had only half the opportunity to influence policy.
Thank you, Kwame. Viewers, that's just a prelude. We've entered the discussion in interrogating the manifesto launched by Accord today. As we proceed in the program, we will be joined by Professor Anyang' Nyong'o, who will give us the political end of it so that we have a comprehensive discussion on this manifesto. Right now, I take you back to Linda and Njoka on the other side of the studio to take us through more of the day's highlights.
All right, Louis, we'll be back with you in a short while. Let's go on with the news. And like I mentioned before, attention is on Prime Minister Raila Odinga after the Coalition for Reform and Democracy launched its ambitious manifesto.
In the same breath, KTN's James Smart spoke to the CORD presidential candidate on this political milestone, and here is part of that interview.
Congratulations on launching the manifesto. How do you feel about it? What is that one thing, if you'd look back, you'd say, from that manifesto, this is what I can run with?
I think first we wanted to put out our clear agenda for the country. And you can see we start with jobs. I think that's a very important starting point. And that's why the other time I said jobs, jobs, jobs. Because we want to have a working country, a working nation. In fact, we are trying to introduce a 24-hour working nation. But if we create jobs for our people, then wealth will be created. That's the best way to fight poverty in your country. And that's why I'm very happy that we've come out with very strongly as a coalition. So you see, the manifesto that we have put out today is actually an amalgam of the various manifestos of WIPA, Democratic Movement, Ford Kenya, and ODM.
The retiring president undoubtedly will take infrastructure as part of his legacy. And do you feel that part of legacy of infrastructure is owed to you? Do you feel you have share in that infrastructure legacy?
I don't want anybody to try to go and make noise that, oh, Raila is trying to take away Kibaki's legacy. You see, there's a president, there's a prime minister, but you can start it with the minister and the president. I used to be minister for roads. I introduced a number of these reforms in the road sector, which are now yielding results today. And all the roads that are being constructed, whether it's a thicker highway, be it the bypasses around the city, the southern bypass, the eastern bypass, the northern bypass, and the link roads. Kenyans know who initiated them, okay? You go and talk about the Mombasa Highway and so on, and back to the energy. Working together with the World Bank, I introduced the reforms in the energy sector, and also converted the rural electrification from a pure commercial venture to an infrastructure project. And I say that rural electrification cannot be treated purely from purely commercial point of view. If you look at return on investment, then it is not viable. But I said, let us look at it as an infrastructure. Let the government provide money for rural electrification. Because if we take electricity to the village, it triggers off economic activities which result in employment and wealth creation in that village. So that's the infrastructure. Of course, water, you know what has happened. So I'm saying we can share. I don't want to take it away from the president.
Speaking about campaigns and politics proper, as the party leader of ODM, you're just coming out of a very difficult primaries and nominations. How do you feel about that?
Believe it or not, Kenya is really being praised outside there. They're saying that Kenyan democracy is maturing. They're saying the first country on the continent of Africa where parties have done primaries. That are doing primaries and being hotly contested. Some people are being dropped, and so on. This has never happened in any other African country. They say that in other African countries, candidates are just handpicked by party leaders and so on. So in my view, these primaries need to be seen more positively. They are beginning. Our democracy is maturing. Still there are some people who have not quite embraced the democratic principles, but they are learning. They're going through a learning process.
You're convinced that's the way to go?
Yeah, I think that's the way to go. It's the way to go. Sometimes our media is overly negative and overcritical of what has happened in this country. But believe it or not, other countries outside this country are actually praising Kenya for what has just happened in this country.
Some of those critics and some of those propaganda, as you say, they said that you are trying to impose, your sister and your brother and leaders upon, people of Nyanza.
Nothing could be really further from the truth. The people in Nyanza know better. They know that I will never impose. And they also know that these people are grown-ups who just wanted to run on their own. Oburu has been in parliament for now 19 years, almost 20 years now. And each time he has been elected, he has never gone in and opposed. There have always been strong opponents, starting from the late Obudongo Mamo and so on. And he has always been elected probably by the people. So there's no time when I have ever gone to intervene on his behalf. I've never even campaigned for him. So he goes in on his own. This time around, it's unfortunate that he was not allowed to campaign for himself in Siaya. The same thing applies to Ruth. Ruth is a married lady. She no longer lives in Odinga's homestead. She's married in Kisumu County. That's where she went to run. And she consulted the people there who told her she should run. And she was a very popular candidate by all accounts.
She feels she won those nominations?
She feels so, and I think you need to go down proper and talk to the people of Kisumu, what they think about it. All of them, most of the people tell you it is very unfortunate that she was treated the way she was treated, that she therefore had to step down. But that again is life. So that's a price that you pay for being a relative of a presidential candidate. So I'm so sorry for both of them. Yeah.
You feel, your brother did not make it.
It's unfortunate that he didn't make it through no fault of his own. Of course, he believes strongly that if he had been nominated, he would have won. But then there was too much of propaganda against him that he supposedly lost before the votes were cast. His opponent announced results even before people cast the votes. And this is what the media ran with. So it's unfortunate, but that's life.
As I went down, I must ask you this. Your opponents nationally have said that they have the numbers, that basically you're running a losing campaign. Do you have the numbers?
Look at it this way. I mean, these people are flaunting ethnic figures. They are flaunting figures saying, oh, we have Mount Kenya, we have Rift Valley, we don't have Eastern, and so on and so forth. They have never shown us anything else. The people are not owned by candidates. So they have not come up with any scientific way to justify what they're talking about. They're basically trying to divide this country in ethnic blocks. But Kenyans have moved on from where they're standing. Kenyans no longer look at themselves in the terms of ethnicity. So people have been asked by surveyors, those who do opinion polling, and they have spoken. So how come these people are speaking on behalf of the people whom they have not asked how they are going to vote? opinion polls basically tells you how these people are going to cast their votes. So on the basis of that basis, how do they have more numbers than myself? How do they have more numbers? Because the numbers can only be made use of on the basis of opinion polls. That is what gives you critical numbers. And by what is on that account, I have more numbers than they do have. Because my support has never been based on my ethnicity. Look at it, originally I was born a Luo, but I've moved on. That's why I play my politics from Nairobi. See, the Luo, according to the last poll, our last census, constitute about 12% of the population. But if you look at the poll since 2008, up to the date, I've received most of the time over 30%, meaning that my support is not ethnic based. It never was ethnic based. My politics, I play from Nairobi here, which is the capital of the country and very cosmopolitan.
So we should do this interview on March the 5th in State House.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
KTN James Madhya speaking to Prime Minister Raila Odinga.
All right, let's move on with the news. And elsewhere, the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission has thrown away most of the complaints lodged against candidates who were awarded party certificates in disputed party primaries.
IEBC says most of the cases lacked sufficient evidence to reverse decisions by parties and said most of the evidence by the complainants were mere hearsay.
And as Aaron Ochieng reports, IEBC has not taken any action against any political party whose supporters exhibited errant behaviors during the primaries.
It is a big relief for big names as IEBC throws out most of the cases presented by disgruntled party losers in the just concluded party primaries. The courtroom at the Milimani Law Courts was packed to capacity as complainants and respondents of 207 petitions that the IEBC Dispute Resolution Tribunal had were waiting to know their fate. And the tribunal took its time as patience ran out for some of the interested parties. The verdict was to be read at about 10 a.m., but the commissioners showed up at exactly 4:45 p.m. The likes of Otieno Kajwang, Shakil Shabir, Jacoyo Midiwo, Agostino Neto, Amos Kimunya were lucky to be spared the axe as IEBC dismissed most of the petitions for lack of evidence.
In a matter of Elisha Ochieng Odhiambo versus Jacoyo Midiwo and ODM for game member National Assembly, the complaint was not allowed as the party nominations were not completed and the party issued direct nomination.
Of the 207 cases before the tribunal, only 111 were listened to, with the rest not showing up or agreeing outside the tribunal's chambers. The commission also dismissed earlier reports by a section of the press that the commissioners were seen dining with a presidential candidate before the delivery of the ruling.
We want to assure you we never met any of those people mentioned and that we were holed up in a hotel where we sat. In fact, we went to bed at 3:30 this morning.
But there were others who felt shortchanged by the tribunal's decision, saying there were evidence of impartiality.
They jumped from number 51 to 53, and the efforts to get the reading, as you see, was not successful.
The EI believe the body is not, IEBC is not a competent body. It is a compromised body that we need to review it again and see whether they are capable to deliver come forth March.
The next step for IEBC is to receive the nomination certificates from parties and issue nominees with IEBC certificates to vie before embarking on the printing of the official ballot papers. Aaron Ochieng, KTN Prime.
Let's stay with politics, and the Jubilee Alliance today spread its campaigns to Tana River County and urged residents to embrace peace as the lasting solution for the recurrent Tana clashes is being sought.
This as Ego Alliance wooed voters in Narok ahead of the March poll. More on these stories in the following politics roundup.
A visit that was aimed at perhaps reminding the people of Tana River that they were not forgotten as the political temperatures hot up across the country.
Palipovita, hatuwezi kuhakikisha ya kwamba yale ambayo au nia njema ambayo tuko nayo itaweza kutimizwa.
Serikali ya mwaka huu ni ya Jubilee ili tuweze kutatua changamoto za watu wa Tana River.
Presidential aspirant Uhuru Kenyatta and his running mate William Ruto spoke about finding a solution to the bouts of clashes in the region. Former Garissa and Member of Parliament Danson Mungatana took the chance to lash out at their political adversaries.
Huyu makamu wa rais na huyu Mheshimiwa Raila, Prime Minister, itakuwaje wao walio ofisini ambao wanatembea na magari ya ofisi, ambao wanakula mishahara ya ofisi, wageuke tena waseme ati sisi ndio tunatumia vitu vya serikali?
In the meantime, presidential flag bearer for the Eagle Alliance, Peter Kenneth, held a series of rallies starting from Nairobi to Narok. Kenneth urged voters to take a critical look at the track record of all those contending in this year's election.
Mimi niko na rekodi yangu ya kufanya kazi. Mimi nimekuwa na eneo la bunge ambalo limeongoza kwa miaka 6 na limeongoza kwa maendeleo. Na mimi nasema kama mtu hawezi eneo lake la bunge, ataweza nchi.
Kenneth also promised that if he becomes president, he would build a referral hospital for Narok County residents to ease the patient load at the Kenyatta National Hospital. Catherine Omwando, KTN.
All right, so on tonight's big question, we are asking you, do you think public schools still need affirmative action in Form 1 selection? The question again, do you think public schools still need affirmative action in Form 1 selection?
Send a yes or no response with a brief comment to the number 8040. And of course, we will sample your views during this newscast and give you the poll results at the end of this bulletin. You're watching Newsline, and just ahead.
Analysts worried of Kenya's growing public debt, now estimated at 1.7 trillion shillings.
Stay with us.
Thank you very much for staying with KTN. Welcome back to Newsline.
Right now, we take you over to Louis Otieno, who is discussing the manifesto that was released today by CORD. Louis, I can see you have an additional guest.
Welcome back. We continue our discussion, and just to remind you, tomorrow night, my guest on a one-on-one interview will be Honorable Musalia Mudavadi. He will come to pitch for your vote as a presidential candidate. And of course, on Wednesday, I shall be at Strathmore. We shall be having a debate for those who want to be the governor of Nairobi City. But back to my guests, and we're now joined by Professor Anyang' Nyong'o, and now you'll help us with the political questions we were asking. Kwame and I had initially begun, but what was the highlight for you today? Let me just ask you from that end.
I think the highlight was really the speeches by the supporters. And the little girls first, who presented the manifesto to the three principles, and then the supporters from all walks of life, young, middle-aged, professional, workers, activists, and so on, pastoralists. I think they made a very, very good contribution in appreciating the content of the manifesto and in identifying the manifesto and giving reasons why they support the manifesto and what they expect from the CORD government. I think that was a good grassroots approach to launching the manifesto. Mm-hmm. And then came the speeches of the three principles, which were really focused. I mean, they didn't waffle, they focused on the document. They explained to the audience the content. They expressed themselves as to what roles they as individuals will play in the CORD government. And they came out as a team. And I think in his speech, the party leader, the presidential candidate, when he came with his Martin Luther King line, free at last, I mean, it was appropriate.
It captured the mood for you?
It captured the mood. And of course, the vice president, just before he introduced the presidential candidate, was really in his elements. I think this is one one performance by the Vice President that I think was just exceptional. I've not seen him so expressive and so involved as a person. I think we really liked it.
Well, he did promise to campaign like
Well,
never
he
before.
did, and today showed that he's not missing his words, and that he's really gone into it, lock, stock, and barrel.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to rain in your parade. I just need to ask a few questions on behalf of my viewers. And one of the things that came up, should there have been a statement of the things that didn't go too well previously? Should there have been a statement of lessons learned before we got a statement of promise?
The problem is that you have a very short time on a day like that. You have a very short time. You have to put to the nation and to the world what you are going to do. Of course, what you are going to do is based on what you assess as having gone wrong, as having not been done. So rather than first explain what has not been done, it goes straight into it. I remember when we did the manifesto for NAC in 2002, democracy and empowerment. We had first of all to do a kind of a rundown of what had been going on in the previous regime, and then say, fine, we know that, but Kenyans want solutions. Kenyans want to know, where are we going to? So we said, well, we want to have democracy and empower the people. And democracy is not enough. You must empower the people economically. And I remember when I was Minister for Planning and National Development, and we said, now we must translate this into a policy, into a program. And the donors came to me and said, well, we have here the poverty reduction strategy paper and the government action program. I told them, look, that's good, but we have been elected on a manifesto, democracy and empowerment, and this is what I'm going to do to write the economic strategy for wealth and employment creation. Yeah, because this is what we promised. And you see, what we are now going to do as a court government, this is now the manifesto. The manifesto to a party, what a constitution is to a country.
Okay.
You see.
Before we get into the detail of that, what do you think about that question? Should there have been even just a flagging of the issues that were not championed prior to this new promise?
Well, I think Prof has explained it fairly well. It's because the interpretation of the state of now and what problems you're solving are a reflection of what you think didn't go right.
Yeah.
So obviously, to that extent, I think it's understandable. I also understand the time pressure, especially because this is broadcast on national TV, and you want to capture that for the audience, and obviously to communicate to those voters that. So it's a fair reflection, because this is an interpretation as a party or as a coalition of what we think has gone wrong, and then we therefore focus on solutions, which is what Kenyans prefer.
I'm sure you've been harangued by the money question. I'm sure that's one of the main things people are asking you. Fantastic promise, sounds good, easy to listen to, easy to celebrate, easy to cheer. Where's the money? How are you going to do this? How are you going to make this true in a country that is reeling under immense debt? We've got a huge debt portfolio. How are you going to do this without taking us under completely?
My point has always been that if you acquire that debt for the right reason, you shouldn't worry really. If you acquire the debt to build infrastructure, to improve the productive capacity of the nation, to improve on human resources, then you are doing the right thing. But if you acquire the debt for consumption, then you are in problems, because you will never get any other way of getting money to meet the next consumption. And this is why I think it was very unfortunate that in the 1970s, 80s, when the money was very cheap in the international market, we borrowed for the wrong reasons, and for projects that never took off, like the Kenren project in Mombasa and so on. But now, as you can see, since the NAC government came in, we've been borrowing for the right reasons. You borrow to build roads, and you can see the roads. You borrow to improve the airport as an international hub, and you can see it happening. And then, of course, follows the results of the investment. If you improve the passenger intake at Jomo Kenyatta International Airport fourfold, of course you're getting taxes that you need to pay for more development, investment, and also to pay the human resources than run these facilities in terms of their salaries.
One step back, Prof, because you've said very well. For you, trouble is borrowing for the wrong reasons. You've identified as an era or a season where Kenya borrowed for the wrong reasons. Where did you draw the line? When did we fix that? Or now it's a continuance? And if it is, how would you repair that?
What we did, I think at the turning point really was the economic recovery strategy for wealth and employment creation. We came in then as a NAC government when Kenya had a negative growth rate, 1.25 negative growth rate per annum. Within a matter of 3 years, we had turned it to 4 to 5% growth rate, and it was going on to 7. Had it not been for the disaster of the 2007 December elections, I think Kenya would have been now a flying eagle. But unfortunately, because of that, the coalition government had to deal with tremendous problems of governance, which took us back. Now, what CORD is doing is now, with the new constitution, which we have fought for many years, and people who have been at the forefront for constitutional reform are now going to be in government of CORD. And some of us have been waiting for this moment for many years. We feel the opportunity has come, the time has come. It's Kenya's moment now to take off as an eagle and realize the goals of Vision 2030. And I think we have the right leader to do that.
Pegging certain reasons for the trip-ups, are these reasons fair when we talk about bureaucracy, a shared government, and we say these are the things that slowed the process of flying like the eagle? As economists, as scientists in that area, do you share the same sort of hiccups?
Well, I think to be fair, yes, some of that was, yes, the borrowing did take place, and most of that money didn't even touch the country in the 80s and late, and even sometimes in the 90s. Some of it was exported back to accounts, and we're still dealing with that. More recently, I am concerned about borrowing for 2 reasons. One of them is that we are borrowing to pay salaries. The public sector wage bill is enormous. For the first time, I think, since the NAC government came in, the amount of money that is anticipated to be collected by the KRA during the last budget is much less than what we'd be paying in salaries. And that was even before the KRA itself failed to meet its targets. So we are chasing, we are at a point where we could flip back to actually an unsustainable debt position. Of course, a student of economics would think that what does happen then is that growth over time extinguishes your debt. Right. But because we are behind in our growth targets of 10% as the vision, which of course succeeded the economic recovery strategy states, I think it's time for us to do that. And Professor Nyong'o, more than everybody else as a former minister should know, or rather as a minister should know, that part of it are the demands of the public sector in terms of wages. So unless we bring, unless every party tells us very, very clearly how you're going to be dealing with the very strong public sector unions, which have been strengthened as well, rightly so, by the new constitution, then the problem of either borrowing or just raising money and using it to pay salaries without some money to invest in the infrastructure, which they say is one. And that I did not see clearly in this new manifesto.
Translation, Prof.
Yeah, sure.
You're spending, no, I'm making the translation.
Yeah, okay.
You're spending, you're asking for more money. The money that is there isn't being spent in a way that benefits the country. We're already behind, so much so that there's a fear now. How do you bridge that gap? And how would you move us from getting money for just sustenance to money for planning in such a way that we're not completely buried in debt, unless you're telling me you're about to raise my taxes?
No, the point is that we must have an incomes policy. One good thing with the Constitution is this institution that has been established, the Incomes and Remuneration Commission. Because for a long time I was saying that our problem is not because people are demanding more wages. Our problem is that we must have an incomes policy which rationalizes the difference between the lowest paid worker and the highest paid worker. If we don't do that, if we don't have an incomes policy, then of course this demand for more wages can spiral out of control. And I'm afraid that at the moment that may be the tendency, as Kwame has said. So what we'll have to do in the CORD government is to strengthen the Salaries and Remunerations Commission, make sure that Parliament does not go to haywire in trying to demand for more and more salaries in other sectors, but make Kenyans realize that savings is important. If you earn money and there are incentives to save, from those savings we can finance a lot of development projects. So you must not starve people wages. If you do, they will not have enough money to buy the commodities produced in the industrial area.
You're a planner, Prof.
So,
just fixing the wages, that already will take a while.
No.
I'm not deviating. I'm just saying you want to fix the wage scenario. That will take a while.
It will not take a while.
And even if you fix that, to what extent will it relieve us of the debt?
No. It will not take a while. What I'm saying, I want to go step by step. Because if you try and grapple with the bigger issues before you get the ABCs of doing it, you'll get it wrong, you see. First and foremost, you really must have a national incomes policy. That's very important. And you must establish institutions that do that. And secondly, you must encourage people to save. And there are many ways by which you encourage people to save. One of the things we're proposing here is a housing policy that encourages people to buy affordable housing supported by government, like we did in the 1960s, the National Housing Corporation, which did a wonderful job building houses for low-income people, middle-income people, and so on. And you can see them up to this very day. Now, if you pump something like 10 billion shillings in National Housing Company or National Housing Corporation, and you say, look, we are going to provide housing for those, because housing is a big problem in this country. And then you'll say, fine, you are working, you have some savings, we want you to encourage you to buy a housing with interest rates that you can afford. There and then, the National Housing Corporation will be building houses which will create jobs, which will create demand for housing material and so on. And that is a basis, first, of dealing with unemployment, and two, creating a stimulus in economic growth by creating demands for inputs for housing construction. You see, so the two must go together. One, have an incomes policy, and two, encourage people to save, and three, provide them with where they spend that money productively for their consumption, because housing is consumed by people who buy it, want to live in it.
Is this anchored on Vision 2030? That question has been bandied about.
It is anchored in Vision, because you see, I'm so familiar with it, because
Yes.
I was Minister for Planning and National Development at a very critical time,
Right.
but also very familiar with it because I'm very familiar with the manifesto, you see. And you see, it is important that we don't argue out of context. Ours is to build on what we have built in Vision 2030, but to deal with problems that have arisen in trying to implement Vision 2030. One of them is bureaucracy. Take, for example, the issue that I've been pursuing, universal healthcare. It's both bureaucracy and vested interests, you see. And those vested interests are very powerful, because they're the kind of interests that will support the media to sing their song, that will support parliamentarians not to pass the necessary laws. You see what I mean? That will also enter government bureaucracy in terms of people who make decisions to drag their feet. So in this regard, you really need a leader that can push, that can say, look, gentlemen and ladies, we go this way.
Does this build your confidence, Kwame? Is there another area you feel needs to be flagged? Because one of the things about a good plan is it must win the confidence of those who are going to be part of it, either by trying to effect policy, or those who will be enjoying policy that works.
Okay, let me just start by saying that I have looked at the summarized version of the CORD manifesto, if I may call it that, the coalition's manifesto. And one of the things that I see is I would not have arranged it any differently, because employment, which comes first, is one of the biggest problems, obviously. And I think even any student of economics accepts that most classical economists think that employment is a problem. You solve employment, you solve many other things. And Prof has talked to us about it. What I have a problem with is in terms of cost of living. And I think this proposal, the manifesto proposes that will bring down cost of living, makes certain suggestions, but two that particularly frighten me. One of those is that in order to bring down the costs of goods and services, I think it says that we will commit ourselves to a 5% reduction in inflation, where the assumption is that most of the inflation that affects us and therefore makes it difficult for poorer people to afford items is because of it comes from outside sources. The truth is, some of the biggest contributors to inflation is just the inefficiencies that exist in our country. Sure. So unless we put our sugar companies to competition and allow those that cannot compete to fail, so that Kenyans should not be buying sugar at a price that is higher.
And not beg Commerce to continue with his concessions.
Precisely. If a Kenyan whose income is 1/15 what a German earns is buying sugar at 150% what a German does. Obviously, that's an injustice. And why? Because we have to maintain certain sugar companies, because there are political interests as well, or maize as well. We have certain farmers who have big farms, and so government protects them by first helping them to buy subsidized fertilizer, then on the other side controlling prices so that they still charge as highly. I think then it means you're supporting an industry, but not Kenya's people.
Sure, you're
so
right.
that fight is
sort out the market in such a way that if the market is effective, then don't open a back door. You have to fight that corruption also.
I couldn't agree with Kwame more. I couldn't agree with Kwame more. I mean, Kwame has hit it right on the head. There must be efficiency gains. If there are no efficiency gains, you're talking nonsense. Kwame, you remember in the 90s, I published a book, The Context of Privatization in Kenya, in which I advocated very strongly, one, a privatization bill, yes, which was funded and presented in Parliament. At that point in time, privatization was looked at as something rather Washington consensus, but it was right. And when it is right, whether it is Washington consensus or not, we must do it. Now, one of the things that I was saying is that sugar companies must be privatized. Because, I mean, the state has failed. That doesn't mean that the state always fails when it goes into business. China has showed us that the state can make a lot of profit and be very efficient.
I want this one to make
profit. Know, but we want to do it here.
Yes.
So, given that the history of the sugar company has shown tremendous inefficiency, tremendous wastage, a punishment of the farmers, and the figures are there, what we must do is privatize them. But there must be a way of privatizing them. One of the steps that we took in Parliament recently was for government to take over the debt, so that the balance sheet is clean, so that somebody coming to buy it is attracted to it to buy it. It is not inherit too many liabilities. Now, having done that, we should now go a step further and actually privatize these farms, and encourage farmers, workers, and the people to buy shares in the farms, without necessarily saying dogmatically that you get a private person or a private enterprise to invest there, and you impose a percentage on that private enterprise, which is completely unreasonable, because nobody is going to buy sugar farm for charity. You know, they do it because of business. Right. So I think these are some of the things that we agree in the manifesto we must do for purposes of efficiency gains, increasing productivity, and making sure that farmers and consumers of sugar get value for their money. Now, another thing, when we're talking about efficiency and productivity, yes, we have this mono attitude about sugar companies. There's no God-given law that says that sugar company must only produce table sugar. No. There are all kinds of byproducts, as has been seen in other cultures like Cuba. Ethanol, perfumes, vaccines, you name it.
What stops us from doing that?
Well, you know, again, bureaucracy and sins of the past. But when I was Minister for Planning and National Development, I took the sugar CEOs to Cuba to see what happens there. They came back and wrote very good reports, which we discussed at Windsor Golf Hotel. I thought they were going to be implemented. They never were. So again...
Actually, I like that you say that, because you've mentioned one of the things that you really need to put in place are institutions.
Yeah.
As we talk about sorting out the huge disparity in salary.
Yeah.
I was just talking to Kwame before you came in, and I was worried about this conversation going on after the 4th. Now, which is the institution you'll point a citizen to when the citizen wants to make sure that the promise you gave, this manifesto that was not a copy and paste, this manifesto that Professor Nyong'o didn't hide in his backyard and craft for a month and then emerge and give it. There was so much work put in it. Where would you point me to? So that I keep checking on this thing as we go.
First, the president. He's the team leader. And of course, the buck stops at his desk. And secondly, the party or the coalition. The coalition must be responsible for delivery. Now, this is what we're saying during this coalition government. We said at the very beginning, let's have a coalition governing council, something, a political body in the coalition that can be politically responsible for what we're doing. Of course, it was never there. So government was operating in a vacuum of politics. You see, you can't have policies pursued without a political context. So we should not make the mistake that we made in NAC, again that we made in this Serikali ya Mseto. We really must have a coalition governing body or a coalition executive board somewhere where the coalition as a political engine that responds to the questions of the people regarding the promises that were made.
Flag an area where you think citizens need to look at, very importantly. I mean, you know, Prof is very good at this. He'll tell us all the rosy details of this, but I need to know, before I say I'm satisfied that the citizen is in for good promise, where would you point a citizen to?
I'd point the citizen to infrastructure, and specifically to the railways.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about LAPSET, because LAPSET is connecting Kenya to other countries.
To other countries.
I'm talking about the railway that we have that is this year about 105 years old, since it was started. So what that tells you is that I did not see it in the condensed version, talking about the railway. Though, of course, you talk about the railways policy and urban railways and everything else. Part of the reason goods and services in Kenya are expensive is because they are transported by road.
Yeah.
Now, again, there's a cartel
Yes,
that will
there's a
oppose you.
cartel, yes.
But the truth is, if we continue to export that, rather, if we continue to import and export through the roads, we will be completely inefficient.
Completely.
Because look at it, construction costs in Kisumu and Nairobi, okay, differ by as much as 25 to 100%
Exactly.
by virtue of the fact that transporting cement from Kisumu to Nairobi, rather from Nairobi,
To
or
Kisumu.
yes, from Athi River, wherever it is,
Yeah,
to Kisumu, is so expensive. So we have to fix the railway, because these are not things that should be transported by road, and that's why you have those problems.
You're right.
There are entrenched interests that will definitely oppose you. I think you should make it very, very clear. If this government earns the mandate of Kenyans, you have to fix it. And I know there's a public-private partnership that has been gone into, and we have, which has been subsisting for 6 years, but the truth is that public-private partnership seems not to be working.
Sophisticated corruption, an area where, you know, you give citizens almost things like social bribery, you know, give them one good thing, but behind, the government is leaking, the economy is leaking, treasury is leaking. The roads, that's deliberate.
That's very deliberate.
It's deliberate.
Yeah.
But how do we check on you? So that as a party, like you've said, you don't do the same thing. You don't engage in sophisticated corruption where we'll not see the railway working. Prof, you know this more than anyone. Development without a railway system, that's a myth.
Yeah, that's why I was saying, Louis, that first there must be institutions that keep people in check. There's no other alternative to that. And fortunately, these institutions are now inherent in the present constitution. That gives me comfort. But let me go back to what Kwame is saying. You know, in 2 or 3, I think the presidential candidate did mention it. We had it in the NAC manifesto that will build a standard gauge railway, and I really pushed for it. Kwame, remember, from Mombasa to Kisumu, Eldoret, into Uganda to Kigali, because we're thinking of it not just in terms of Kenya, but connecting us to the countries to which we export, because Uganda, you know, is our most important trading partner.
True.
In fact, the leading trading partner in the world today, as far as Kenya is concerned. So really, we ready to build the railway going there, standard gauge, using electricity, not these old museum-type railway that we have today.
The museum still runs.
Yeah, but the thing is that even this concessioning thing, I opposed it when I was Minister for Planning and National Development. I'm on record. I really opposed it because I knew it was not going to work, and it hasn't worked. So we are back to square one, where we have to build a standard gauge railway to the interior. The other thing that we must do in the city of Nairobi to make the city efficient, both in terms of communication and other things, is to have tramways. Light rail cars, because doing a subway is much more expensive and we can't afford it. Tramways are very easy to do. You do it and they can mix with cars and so on. That will make it much easier to come to KTN on a night like this. I didn't need to drive, you see. It will make it easier for people to get to the airport and catch their planes without this kind of jam that we have here. Right. So those are urgent. Those we cannot wait. So if we borrow to do that, I would understand. And then we must make sure, as you are saying, that while doing that, there's no sophisticated corruption going on, because that's also a leakage and a wastage we cannot afford. But finally, Kwame, one of the things that is so important about Kenya, and I've always said that Kenya is a country or a nation of a very high potential, but a disappointing underachiever. Take, for example, the lake. Really, in colonial times, up to some time at independence, we had very good mercantile trade on the lake, maritime trade and so on. The MV Victoria, MV Kamongo and so on were going on. They are no longer there. We had at the port of Kisumu one of the most promising railway workshops and dry dock.
East African railroads.
Yeah, and the machines are still there. They have not been used for over a quarter of a century. The dry dock is not being used. The one in Mwanza is being used. Ferries are being made there. Ships are being prepared. Boats are being made. Ours in Kisumu has been dead for about a quarter of a century. And it is still there. It can still be used. These are the kind of potential that we should awaken so that we can achieve what we should have achieved many years ago. But it's never too late. God is there.
Kwame, I need to close this. So what would you say as an issue that would help us, or one area where you tell the citizen, we shall be checking on this after every quarter period, and these will be the indicators?
Okay, I think the other is the wages policy is important, but I think one of the other things that all parties should do is to commit themselves to understanding what the labor supply and labor market in Kenya is like. Because this party mentioned specifically, or rather the manifesto mentioned specifically, that you're committed to a income redistributive policy. And I wonder how you can redistribute income in a country in which those who have formal sector jobs are 3 million, even less. The rest of the country is 37 million. You can only redistribute much. So as we talk about NHIF and NSSF, these very bodies which I am not particularly fond of, Prof, because they're completely non-transparent, not to mention corrupt. So if you're asking each of us to give in some more money to this, you're actually asking us to fill up a pot that is broken up at the bottom. So unless you actually fix this, and part of fixing them, to be honest, is to actually change the people who run them. It's not for me to suggest how you do that, but as a person who's contributed to NHIF and NSSF, I have very little confidence in its managers. They're probably very educated and all that, but I don't think they have their pulses in the right place. So yes, redistribute income, but redistribute it efficiently. Because even the maize scandal, or what came up of the subsidy around maize, was about redistributing income and helping us, and you know how it comes about. So inefficient redistribution necessarily leads to corruption. So take care of that as well.
Prof, as you respond, and I will close with the response. I've got to close this. But Kwame, that pot is not broken. There's a deliberate hole that has been neatly cut out at the bottom because it feeds into something else. But this leads me to just the very important thing, building the confidence. A promise can be written so well, it can be given so well, it can be announced beautifully. Will you have the confidence? What, for example, will you make as a dramatic indicator in terms of maybe leaders of these institutions, in terms of maybe restructuring the way these institutions work? So that now when Monenchi says, I'm being taxed, they are confident it will be used well.
Yeah, you know, Kwame, you have two choices. One is demolish the house. This house is not good, demolish it, build it new. That's a possible choice. You ask yourself, do you have the resources to do that? The other one said, well, this house is wobbly, let us restructure it. Let us see how we can restructure it and strengthen it so that it can do better. And that's what we decided to do with the NHIF, and that's when we brought in IFC and so on. And we had a good game plan. The trouble is that people get very impatient. They say, no, that game plan, yes, it is good, but knock out these heads, let them go off. And if you knock out the heads, collective memory goes, you may find it very difficult to follow the game plan that you have put in place.
So more plaster.
So what happened was that, you know, people did not want to appreciate the game plan that is for restructuring to make it work more efficiently. I did it very successfully with KEMSA, Kenya Medical Supplies Agency. I did it very successfully with the technology and board. You know, we did it very successfully with Kenyatta National Hospital. You see, but NHIF is kind of emotive. So Kwame wants to see instant solutions, like an instant cup of tea. It doesn't work in the real world.
I just need you to build confidence.
And that's why we're building confidence. Now, one of the things that we must build confidence, I agree with Kwame, leadership is very important.
As we close now.
As we close, I agree with Kwame, leadership is very important, that you must put faces that people have confidence in. I agree with you entirely. And changes in leadership is very important, because when you change leadership, somebody comes in like restructuring a company, you get
so will you do this?
a new CEO. Yes, sure, definitely.
You'll do this?
Definitely. In fact, I did it in KEMSA, at the board, at Kenyatta, and so on, MTRH and all that.
So CORD will do this?
CORD will do this, I'm telling you. We are committed to it because we have seen it work in our own situation. We know it has to work if our manifesto is going to be implemented successfully. And we know there's so much potential in Kenya. There are so many people, good people who can do things. People like Kwame here, people like you here, young people, very motivated, waiting to be given the opportunity. They have to be given the opportunity.
Thank you,
so there you saw Babu Namwamba and Kiari, young people doing a wonderful job. That is a sign of the times that things to come are great. CORD is there.
CORD is there. Well, Kwame, thank you very much for sharing. The responsibility I'll give you is we shall have to do a more, sort of evaluation. We'll have to check this as we go along, quarterly perhaps. Yeah. And Prof, I will be tying you to your promises.
Sure, sure.
I will remind you of that special line you've dropped, that CORD is there.
Yes.
When things start going upside down and I drop that line, and you don't disown it, Prof.
I won't.
Right? Thank you for sharing your time with us this evening. Well, that has been the discussion, just to understand what the motivation for CORD launching their manifesto was today. And going forward, we all have a responsibility to check on these promises and see that they work. Just to remind you, as we go into a break, tomorrow night, our guest, Honorable Musalia Mudavadi, you decide if you will vote for him as the president. And on Wednesday, we will be at Strathmore, finding out who is fit, who is good enough to earn your vote as the governor of Nairobi. Thank you for being with us on this session. We'll take a break and go back to Linda and Eric on the other side of the studio.
All right, thank you for staying with us this far. Let's take a look at business now. Managing Kenya's public debt should be a priority to the next government, according to analysts at Pine Bridge Investments. This is informed by the current debt level, now at 1.7 trillion shillings, and is likely to grow with the expected transition to devolved system of government. Michael Karanja explores.
Kenya's public debt has been rising over the years and is currently hovering at 46% of the GDP. This is a significant rise, increasing by over 87% over the last 5 years, when the level of public debt stood at 871 billion shillings in the 2007-2008 financial year. While Treasury maintains that anything above 50% debt to GDP is risky, the entry of a new government and financing of the devolved structures will be key to ensuring the economy remains healthy.
Kenya's fiscal position remains an area of concern, as public debt has been increasing. Public debt comprises government domestic and foreign borrowing obligations.
During the current fiscal year, revenue collection has been behind the target by close to 50 billion shillings, while expenditure has been growing at a higher pace. But with falling inflation and steady fall in interest rates, it is expected to pump credit to sectors that boost economic growth.
Whereas Kenya's debt level may appear relatively low at 46%, prudent fiscal management is key in maintaining a sustainable level of debt. Any economic shock at a time that Kenya is transitioning to a devolved government structure is likely to worsen the country's indebtedness.
Pine Bridge Investments forecast the economy to grow by 5.5% in the current fiscal year. Michael Karanja, KTN Business Today.
Michael Karanja there reporting 1.7 trillion shillings, not a very interesting figure. Moving on, local airline Jetlink Express is on course to back to business following a joint venture memorandum of understanding it has signed. The airline, which suspended its operations in November last year, will be in the next few months launching a partnership with low-cost airline FastJet. The deal is expected to launch FastJet brand and low-cost flying business model in the Kenyan market. In a statement to newsrooms, the two airlines indicated that the MOU is subject to a number of conditions precedent, including board and any other necessary approvals. Jetlink suspended its operations under financial distress occasioned by a low call in one of its finances in neighboring South Sudan, which is currently facing foreign exchange shortage. Right, you're watching Business. Let's now take a look at the financial markets review.